When you think of the best animated films ever made, normally you'd think of films made by Walt Disney, Hayao Miyazaki, or Don Bluth back when he actually knew how to tell a story. But there's one animator who felt that the art of animation had not reached its full potential, and spent almost 30 years of his life making what he thought would be the Citizen Kang of animation. That man was Richard Williams, and his film was The Thief and the Cobbler. The production of the film began way back in 1964. Richard Williams was always fond of Arabian artwork and folklore, particularly the tales of Mullah Nasruddin. For the majority of the production, The Thief would be funded by Richard himself, using the money that he earned making commercials, intros for other films, and TV productions such as the 1971 adaptation of A Christmas Carol. Richard had big ambitions for this project, and he wanted this film and his studio to save the animation from becoming a dead form of art. Because of this, the film kept going over budget, and the production of this film went much longer than anyone ever anticipated, spanning multiple decades. It wasn't until about the mid to late 80s when Steven Spielberg saw a finished scene of The Thief. He was so impressed by the footage that he hired him as an animation director on Robert Zemeckis' animation, live-action hybrid film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Richard's work on Roger Rabbit would earn him a Special Achievement Award at the Oscars. This caught the attention of Warner Brothers, who agreed to give The Thief proper funding. However, Richard was such a perfectionist when it came to this film that it was still taking him a long time to finish. On top of that, Warner Brothers didn't care for the work print that Richard presented to them, thinking that a film so strange and unconventional from what was popular at the time wouldn't be able to compete with Disney financially. Because of all of this, Richard Williams was fired from his own project. The film was then given to the Completion Bond Company, who gave the film to an animation team headed by Fred Calvert. This version of the film would be titled The Princess and the Cobbler, and included musical numbers to compete with Disney, along with many other changes that were completely against what Richard intended for his film. And if that wasn't bad enough, when it was being released in the US, Harvey Weinstein, fuckhead of the film industry that he is, felt that the film just wasn't Disney enough to entertain us dumb Americans. So his company Miramax decided to edit together their version of the film, which included even more changes to the point where it was completely unrecognizable from what Richard originally intended, and it was titled Arabian Night.
Just like Les Mis.
Richard Williams' animation masterpiece was turned into a Disney knockoff that belonged in a dumpster full of millions of other Disney knockoffs. It wasn't until 2007 through 2013 that indie filmmaker Garrett Gilchrist would make a fan-made edit of the film that would be more faithful to what Richard intended. This version would be uploaded to the internet and was constantly updated with previously unseen footage provided by work prints and by people who originally worked with Richard Williams. This version of the film was titled The Thief and the Cobbler, Recobbled Cut. And this, my friends, is the version I'll be reviewing today. So what is this supposed greatest animated film of all time about, you might be asking? Well, it's about a guy named Tak who starts off with a simple life as a cobbler, and through circumstances out of his control, he embarks on a journey to save the Golden City. On paper, the story is quite simple, almost formulaic, as if it was pulled straight out of The Hero of a Thousand Faces. In the wrong hands, this would have been a completely dull and unoriginal story, and the characters would have been as one note as Mr. Happy. But what makes The Thief and the Cobbler so unique in its writing is the execution of the story. Richard Williams wanted the majority of The Thief and the Cobbler to be told strictly through its visuals by having the two title characters be silent, with only one of them having one singular line at the very end of the film. The choice to keep these two characters silent was brilliant, because there's so much the audience can interpret from these two just by watching their actions in the film alone, rather than having a gratuitous amount of dialogue added to the film as a last-minute decision. For example, while the thief in the film is here mostly for comic relief and to unintentionally screw things up for the Golden City and unintentionally help Tak on his journey, his story can easily be interpreted as a tragedy about greed and corruption affecting the people at the level of poverty. The thief seems to have no money for himself, no food to eat, and no bed to sleep on, and yet he lives in a place called the Golden City. This obviously must have driven the thief nuts, hence why he made it his life goal to steal everything shiny and gold in sight. And of course, there's our main protagonist, Tak the Cobbler. Not only does his character go through a physical transformation by being more tan as the film goes on, but he's able to show his entire character arc with no dialogue whatsoever. When you first see Tak in the film, you notice that he has an incredible gift for cobbling. However, the Golden City doesn't seem to have much use for someone with such talent other than a low-earning job. Because of this, Tak doesn't really have much of a will to live. When he's unlawfully arrested at the beginning, he doesn't fight off the guards or anything like that, he just accepts whatever horrible fate comes his way. It's not until he meets the princess that he gains some sort of objection to what's going on around him. Actually, now that I think about it, the movie never specifies whether Tak cobbled as a profession or a hobby. I mean, it looks like the middle of the day when the movie starts, and Tak has no customers and he's sleeping. It's also revealed that he has no money in his pockets. Maybe before the film started, Tak had no drive to put his talent to good use professionally at all. But hey, that's just a theory. Join me next time and I'll talk about how the 7 dwarves are a metaphor for multiple personality disorder. No, but seriously, there's a good chance that I'm reading way too deeply into this film. But considering that Richard Williams' first film, The Little Island, was an interpretive film, I'd imagine he would admire this kind of audience interpretation in his work. Anyways, the character with the most dialogue in the film is actually the main villain, Zigzag the Grand Vizier, voiced by the legendary Vincent Price. He's a man that uses his power of authority and magic to manipulate the people of the Golden City and the One-Eyed Army. This guy is so egotistical that the first scene that he's in, he's throwing a parade for himself in front of the villagers and treating himself like he's the king. But what really makes his character interesting is the fact that he speaks entirely in rhyme.
Be calm, Serene Highness. You must catch your breath. What dawn of disaster? Why speak you of death?
And some of his dialogue is even structured like poetry with reoccurring lines such as,
"Hey, Fido."
Vincent Price reads these lines perfectly, and it's always a joy listening to this guy talk. While there's no character in the film that I would consider bad, if I had to pick a least favorite, it would have to be the princess. First of all, her name is stupid. I mean, Princess Yum Yum? Seriously? Princess Yum Yum. Ugh, Jesus. But putting that aside, she just doesn't do a whole lot in the second and third act other than recruit the brigands. Not to mention, she's responsible for one of my least favorite parts of the film.
Where is my back scratcher? Oh, well, I have another. La la. What's happening to me?
Ugh, just turn around for fuck's sake. Turn around! Alright, now let's talk about the animation. Now, you're probably looking at this film thinking, you know, this kinda looks like Aladdin. And yes, there are similarities to this in Aladdin, such as the Arabian-like setting, the fact that King Nod and the Sultan are practically the same character in design and personality, and how Zigzag looks like the offspring of Jafar and the Genie. But obviously, this was being made long before Aladdin. And Disney looked at the production of The Thief and said, you know what? We need to make our own film about Arabia and have it compete with that film. Yeah, they do that sometimes. But whereas Aladdin looks like your average Disney film set in Arabia, Richard wanted to use the medium of animation to create a world that was unlike anything the world had ever seen at the time. The amount of effort Richard and his team of animators put into this film can clearly be seen on the screen. I mean, they weren't wasting that 30 years playing darts and shit. The animation in The Thief and the Cobbler was heavily inspired by Persian miniatures. The way Richard draws nature, floorboard patterns, and even some of the character designs is highly reminiscent of this style of art. Even with the strange and unconventional design of the characters, their movement, weight, and expression is absolutely perfect. When you see the thief being thrown in the air, you really feel like there's something with weight being thrown around. The amount of effort the animators put into creating the Golden City is pretty unbelievable too. I mean, this place is freaking huge! And you can just tell that Richard and his team went the extra mile to make this place feel as real and detailed as possible. There are also scenes in the film that play around with optical illusions inspired by the drawings of M.C. Escher, resulting in one of the best chase scenes I've seen in an animated film. Another thing that blew my mind about the animation is how a lot of the drawings, particularly during the climax of the film, looked completely three-dimensional. Keep in mind, this film was completely hand-drawn, and some of these scenes were completed long before CGI was even a thing. And speaking of the climax, this is one of the best third acts I've seen in any film. Don't worry, I won't give away what happens. I'm not nearly as much of a dick now as I was last year. But much like with the rest of the story, in the wrong hands, this ending could have been completely anticlimactic. But it's the extreme amount of detail put into this moment of the film that makes it exciting from beginning to end. Now, because this is an unfinished film, there will be moments when the film will cut from finished animation to unfinished animation to storyboards, and even some animation from Fred Calvert's team. But the finished animation from Richard Williams is some of the best animation that has ever been made. So, is Richard Williams' version of The Thief and the Cobbler the best animated film ever made? Well, Personally, I feel there are other animated films more deserving of that title, but if this film were to be completed the way Williams intended, it would definitely be in the league of those films. Unfortunately, there's no way of watching this version of the film without downloading it or watching it on this website, so I'll be providing links to pages where you can donate to Garrett Gilchrist and even Richard Williams himself. I'd also recommend checking out The Persistence of Vision, a documentary that goes into more detail about the life of Richard Williams and the history of the Thief and the Cobbler. I'll also be providing a link to the Change.org petition that us fans of Richard Williams made to get Disney to restore and complete The Thief and the Cobbler the way Richard had intended it. We managed to get over 1,000 signatures thanks to Guillermo del Toro promoting the page on his Twitter account. Personally, I have high hopes for this film despite everything that's happened. After all, the internet practically memed the president into office. Maybe with enough help, us film nerds can finally give this film the completed version that it deserves.